For Jung, the true mystery was never locked away in secret vaults or guarded by initiates. It was always right in front of us, hidden in symbols, dreams, and myths. Rather than forbidden secrets, the unconscious communicates through images that transcend generations, reflecting profound truths about the human psyche. As a pioneer of analytical psychology, Jung unveiled the invisible patterns that shape our emotions, behaviors, and belief. He revealed that symbols are not merely cultural constructs but expressions of the collective unconscious, carrying meanings that resonate across all eras. His work influenced not only psychology but also spirituality, art, and the interpretation of humanity's greatest mysteries. His studies led him to explore alchemy, mythology, and even esoteric traditions, seeking to understand how these systems reflect inner processes of transformation. After all, the greatest secret was never something external, it has always been within each of us. The religious and esoteric influence on Jung. Carl Jung grew up immersed in a religious environment that confronted him with profound spiritual dilemmas from an early age. His father was a Protestant pastor, but far from being a man of unwavering faith. He wrestled with doubts that Jung could sense in his eyes and silent gestures. This contrast between dogma and uncertainty sparked a deep restlessness in young Carl. How could spirituality be both a universal truth and such a deeply personal experience? This question followed him throughout his life, leading him to explore not only Christianity but also Eastern traditions such as Buddhism and Hinduism. He noticed recurring symbols within these religions, universal archetypes that seemed to echo from the depths of the human psyche. But Jung did not stop at institutionalized religions. His search took him down even more obscure paths: alchemy, astrology, and Gnosticism. He realized that ancient alchemists were not merely trying to turn lead into gold, they were symbolizing an internal process of transformation. It was as if the true secret of alchemy was hidden within metaphors, waiting to be deciphered. Jung studied esoteric texts and found that the language of alchemical symbols was eerily similar to the images that appeared in his patients' dreams. The philosopher's stone, gold, mercury, all of these were symbolic expressions of the individuation process, the human journey toward wholeness. However, there is an even more intriguing layer to this story. Jung had indirect connections to initiatory societies, and some theories suggest that he may have been close to the Grand Lodge Alpina of Switzerland. Although no concrete evidence confirms his affiliation, his writings reveal a remarkable understanding of Masonic rites and the concept of spiritual initiation. To him, every initiation symbolized a rebirth, a symbolic death of the ego to make way for a deeper identity. The fact that Freemasonry places such great emphasis on symbols and processes of psychic transformation does not seem like mere coincidence. But this raises an intriguing question. To what extent did these influences shape his work? Origins and education of Carl Jung. Carl Jung's childhood was marked by a peculiar blend of solitude and intense observation of the world around him. Born into a deeply religious family, he grew up surrounded by discussions of God, sin, and morality. Yet, at the same time, he sensed an inconsistency in these beliefs within his own home. His father, a Protestant pastor, spoke with conviction about faith, but Jung felt that he did not truly believe in what he preached. This paradox planted the seed of doubt and inquiry in his mind, leading him to seek answers beyond the words of his family. Unlike other children who immerse themselves in the external world, Jung turned inward, diving into dreams and fantasies that he himself could not fully comprehend. His inclination toward introspection became even more evident in adolescence when he began to feel distanced from conventional thinking. While other young people were concerned with trivial activities, Jung was obsessed with the workings of the human mind and the mystery of existence. he experienced what today might be called altered states of consciousness, moments when he felt connected to something greater. These episodes were not mere products of an overactive imagination, but signs that his mind operated on a symbolic level, attempting to decipher hidden meanings behind everyday reality. This natural tendency to explore the psyche led him to study medicine, believing that the body and mind were inseparable in understanding the human being. Upon entering university, Jung realized that psychiatry was still an underdeveloped field, dominated by reductionist approaches that sought to treat mental disorders without considering the depth of the psyche. He, on the other hand, believed that something deeper lay behind the symptoms, something rooted in the symbolic structure of the unconscious. This led him to study cases of schizophrenia in an innovative way, attempting to understand patients' visions and delusions not as mere pathological manifestations but as expressions of an unconscious mind operating in its own unique language. This was the first step toward developing a new way of understanding the human mind. Jung's relationship with Freud and the birth of analytical psychology. The partnership between Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud was a meeting of brilliant minds, but also a clash of worldviews. When Jung met Freud, he was already a promising young psychiatrist who saw psychoanalysis as a revolutionary approach to understanding the unconscious. Freud, in turn, saw Jung as the ideal successor to carry his theory forward. Their mutual respect was evident, so much so that, during their first meeting, they spoke for an incredible 13 hours without interruption. Jung was fascinated by the idea that psychological symptoms had deep unconscious roots, and Freud saw him as an ally who could expand his theory beyond the Jewish European intellectual circle, making it more universal. However, as Jung delved deeper into his studies, he began to perceive limitations in Freud's model. Freud insisted that sexual impulses were the driving force of the unconscious, whereas Jung saw something far greater and more expansive at play. He believed that the human mind was not solely driven by individual traumas and repressions but also by collective forces that span generations. This led Jung to develop his own theory of the collective unconscious, a reservoir of symbols, archetypes, and universal patterns that manifested in myths, dreams, and religions throughout history. To Freud, this was scientific heresy. The rupture between them was inevitable and, for Jung, profoundly painful. He admired Freud but could not accept such a limited view of the human psyche. Their separation plunged him into an intense personal crisis, a period of deep isolation and exploration of his own unconscious. During this time, he became obsessively devoted to the study of symbols, ancient mythologies, and alchemy, seeking to understand how the human psyche was structured beyond the Freudian perspective. From this phase emerged his most defining concepts: archetypes, individuation, and the notion that the mind is a vast and symbolic field where humanity's past intertwines with individual experience. Jung and spirituality. Jung never saw spirituality as merely a system of beliefs, but rather as a fundamental psychic phenomenon essential for human development. Unlike Freud, who viewed religion as a childish illusion, Jung recognized that religious symbols carried profound truths about the structure of the psyche. He extensively studied mythologies and spiritual traditions, from biblical texts to Buddhist and Hindu teachings, seeking to understand how these narratives reflected universal patterns of the collective unconscious. What he discovered was astonishing. Gods, rituals, and symbols were psychological manifestations of humanity's search for meaning and wholeness. This perspective led Jung to see spirituality as a vital element of the psyche. To him, denying the spiritual dimension of life was as grave an error as ignoring the influence of the unconscious. He observed that mythological symbols, such as the cross, the mandala, and the serpent, appeared repeatedly in the experiences of his patients, even among those with no direct exposure to such traditions. This led him to conclude that humans carry within them an innate need to connect with something greater, whether through religion, philosophy, or art. He saw this search as a process of individuation, in which individuals not only gain deeper self-understanding but also align themselves with forces beyond conscious reason. His fascination with esoteric traditions, such as alchemy, reinforced this view. He realized that medieval alchemists were, in fact, engaging in a symbolic process of inner transformation. Similarly, he found parallels between alchemical processes and the spiritual experiences described in various religions. Analytical psychology, therefore, not only incorporated spiritual elements but also reinterpreted them as keys to understanding the workings of the mind. This raises an intriguing question. To what extent can psychological development occur without a symbolic and spiritual dimension? The Masonic connection in Jung's family. Carl Jung's genealogy holds more mysteries than many realize. His grandfather, Carl Gustav Jung, from whom he inherited his name, was an influential figure in Switzerland and, according to some sources, had ties to Freemasonry. Jung grew up hearing stories about his family, the importance of hidden knowledge, and the transformation of the individual through rites of passage. This may have left deep marks on his psyche because, years later, his work would reflect an extraordinary understanding of initiatory symbols. From ancient Hermetic rites to alchemical principles, he seemed to recognize a universal pattern in the quest for self-knowledge, a pattern that is also present in Freemasonry. Although there is no concrete evidence that Jung was initiated into the order, indications suggest that he was close to figures associated with Switzerland's Grand Lodge Alpina. His fascination with the structure of Masonic rites is evident in his views on initiation and psychological transformation. In Freemasonry, each degree represents a stage of inner evolution. Jung saw these rituals as living archetypes, not merely conveyors of knowledge but catalysts for profound internal change. It was as if the symbolic experience itself was the true key to awakening consciousness. This interest was not limited to theory. Jung applied the same concept in psychotherapy, developing methods that helped his patients navigate their own initiatory processes. He realized that much human suffering stemmed from the lack of a proper rite of passage, a symbolic event to mark the end of one phase and the beginning of another. Today, this can still be seen in therapeutic practices that use symbols, mandalas, and mythological narratives to help individuals integrate their crises and rebuild themselves. At its core, Jungian psychology and initiatory rituals share the same ultimate goal: guiding individuals toward their most authentic selves. The masculine influence in Jung's life. From a young age, Carl Jung felt torn between two opposing forces within his own home. On one side was his father, a Protestant pastor who represented authority, formal knowledge, and religious structure. On the other was his mother, an emotionally unstable woman shrouded in an almost mystical aura, carrying a dark mystery that Jung could sense but never fully understand. This duality shaped his perception of the world. While his father provided an intellectual foundation, his mother awakened in him a fascination with the unconscious and the inexplicable. He grew up trying to balance these influences, seeking a masculine figure as a safe harbor amid the uncertainty and emotional chaos he felt around him. This search intensified when he encountered male figures who served as intellectual and spiritual guide. Freud was one of these figures, a mentor who, for a time, fulfilled the role of a paternal reference. However, as Jung matured, he realized that he needed to break free from this influence to develop his own thinking. His separation from Freud was not merely an academic split but a profound psychological process, the need to challenge the father in order to become an independent individual. This pattern repeated itself throughout Jung's life, as if he were constantly seeking a masculine structure to provide security, until he himself assumed that role for others. Perhaps this is why Jung was so drawn to hierarchical and initiatory systems. He saw the process of individuation as a structured path, similar to the degrees of initiation in secret societies, where each stage represents an advance in consciousness. Just like in Freemasonry, where an apprentice must overcome symbolic challenges to reach higher levels of understanding, Jung saw the human psyche as a battlefield between forces that needed reconciliation. The masculine and the feminine, order and chaos, reason and mystery, all were part of a larger interplay, where achieving balance meant integrating these opposing forces within oneself. Was Jung a Freemason? This is one of the most controversial questions about Carl Jung. Some claim that he had ties to Freemasonry, while others argue that there is no concrete proof of his initiation. The fact remains that his work carries a deep understanding of symbols, rites, and initiatory processes, elements highly valued in Freemasonry. Jung did not merely study these traditions. He interpreted them as expressions of the collective unconscious. To him, rites of passage, degrees of learning, and hidden symbols were not just components of a secret fraternity but part of a universal psychic code. Jung's proximity to members of Freemasonry also fuels this speculation. He had connections with intellectual and esoteric circles that frequently interacted with the order. Moreover, the structure of analytical psychology bears striking parallels to Masonic principles. The idea of progressive self-discovery, the necessity of confronting one's shadow before reaching the light, and the concept of symbolic death and rebirth are themes that resonate in both Jungian teachings and Masonic rituals. Was this a coincidence or a direct influence? Whether Jung was a Freemason or not, this question may never have a definitive answer. But what truly matters is the impact this philosophy had on his thinking. He saw initiation as an essential psychological process, something that anyone could experience throughout life, regardless of membership in an esoteric order. Ultimately, the true initiation, according to Jung, happened within the mind, in the meeting between the conscious and the unconscious, in the confrontation with the deepest mysteries of the self. Circumambulation, a psychological and ritualistic concept. Jung used the term circumambulation to describe the symbolic movement of the psyche around the self, the center of personality. Unlike a linear path, individuation does not happen directly but follows a spiral-like journey, where the individual repeatedly moves closer to and farther away from their true self. In dreams and therapy, this process appears as recurring patterns, events that seem to repeat until the person fully grasps their deeper meaning. For Jung, it was as if the psyche were drawing circles around a central truth, waiting for the right moment to access it. This concept has clear parallels with ancient rituals. In many spiritual traditions, circumambulation appears as a sacred act. In Hinduism and Buddhism, devotees walk in circles around temples to symbolize reverence for the divine. In Islamic tradition, pilgrims circle the Kaaba in Mecca. The physical movement itself represents the gradual approach to a sacred center. Jung realized that these rituals were not merely religious practices but archetypal expressions of a fundamental psychological process, the search for center, balance, and wholeness. In Jungian therapy, circumambulation can be observed when a person feels they are reliving the same challenges. Perhaps someone repeatedly encounters similar patterns in relationships or faces difficulties that seem to return in different forms. Jung would argue that this does not indicate stagnation, but rather a necessary cycle for the psyche to absorb and integrate what it needs. Each repetition carries a lesson, bringing the individual closer to their true purpose. The key is not to try to escape this movement but to understand what it is trying to reveal. The symbolism of circumambulation in ancient traditions. The idea of walking around a sacred center is far older than one might imagine. Ancient civilizations used circumambulation as a ritualistic act to mark transitions, seek protection, or attain a deeper spiritual connection. In ancient Egypt, priests performed this movement around divine statues in temples, symbolizing the power of the gods enveloping and protecting the sacred space. In Judaism, the tradition of Hakafot involves circling the Torah during festivals, representing devotion and reverence for divine knowledge. In Tibetan Buddhism, monks walk around stupas to align their spiritual energy with the cosmos. The logic behind this movement is not just religious, it is also psychological. For Jung, these practices symbolize the inner journey of the individual around the self, reflecting humanity's need to gradually approach its own essence. The circular movement avoids direct confrontation, allowing truth to be revealed progressively, without abrupt disruptions. Just as a river flows around obstacles before reaching the sea, the psyche requires this indirect path to process its mysteries. Another fascinating example is found in Islam. During the pilgrimage to Mecca, believers circle the Kaaba 7 times, following a precise and ordered movement. This ritual, beyond reinforcing spiritual connection, generates a powerful psychological effect, placing the practitioner in sync with a universal rhythm, where the individual dissolves into the collective. Jung saw such practices as reflections of a fundamental human need, the search for a center, for inner harmony, which is often difficult to achieve through rational thought alone. The circle, in this case, is not just a symbol, it is a path. Jung, analytical psychology, and Freemasonry. The parallels between Jung's analytical psychology and the principles of Freemasonry are intriguing. Both emphasize the transformation of the individual through challenges, the pursuit of self-knowledge, and the necessity of initiation to reach a higher level of consciousness. In Freemasonry, the apprentice begins his journey as a rough stone that must be refined. In Jungian terms, this mirrors the path of individuation, the gradual progress of integrating the unconscious and conscious mind until achieving a more balanced and authentic state. The symbolism present in Masonic rituals directly resonates with Jung's concepts of the collective unconscious. The initiation process, where the candidate undergoes trials and lessons before becoming a master, can be seen as a metaphor for psychological development. Just as in ancient rites of passage, the initiate must face challenges that test his ability to understand himself, overcoming illusions and limitations. This mirrors the necessity of confronting one's shadow, the repressed aspects of the psyche that Jung believed were essential for personal growth. Another connection lies in the use of symbols and archetypes. Both Jung and Freemasonry recognized the power of these timeless images in shaping the human mind. The all-seeing eye, Jacob's ladder, the compass, and the square. All of these represent fundamental ideas about spiritual evolution and self-awareness. For Jung, these symbols were keys to accessing the unconscious and interpreting the internal mysteries of the human being. What makes this connection even more fascinating is that, despite no direct evidence proving that Jung was a Freemason, his work demonstrates a profound understanding of the structures and teachings of the order. Jung's relationship with alchemy. When Jung began studying alchemy, he realized something that few others had seen. Ancient alchemists were not merely attempting to transform metals, they were also describing a process of psychological transformation. What seemed to be an external search for gold was, in reality, a metaphor for the human journey toward wholeness. In alchemical texts, Jung found symbols that mirrored exactly what he observed in the dreams and hallucinations of his patients, images of dissolution, purification, and rebirth, following a universal pattern. Jung interpreted alchemy as a symbolic map of the psyche. Lead represented the denser, more primitive aspects of human nature, while gold symbolized full and integrated consciousness. Between these two extremes lay a long path of transformation, the same process he called individuation. To him, alchemists were the precursors of depth psychology, unknowingly dealing with the mysteries of the mind. They projected their internal dilemmas onto the substances they manipulated, unaware that the true laboratory was the soul itself. This connection between alchemy and analytical psychology led Jung to deepen his studies in esoteric texts such as the Aurora Consurgens and the Mutus Liber. In them, he saw an exact representation of what happens within any person seeking a higher level of consciousness. The alchemical fire was the necessary suffering that transformed the ego. The dissolution of elements symbolized the deconstruction of illusions, and Mercury represented the fluid principle of the psyche, which adapts and evolves. In the end, true alchemy did not take place in the furnaces of medieval laboratories. It happened within each individual who dared to confront their own darkness in order to find the light. The three stages of psychic and alchemical transformation. Jung observed that the process of individuation, the pursuit of psychic wholeness, followed a pattern similar to that described by medieval alchemists. He identified three main stages of this transformation: nigredo, albedo, and rubedo, each representing an essential phase in the journey of self-knowledge. These stages, once explained through metaphors and symbols, gained a new interpretation within analytical psychology, revealing that true alchemy takes place within the human mind. The first stage, nigredo, is the phase of darkness and dissolution. The alchemist's lead symbolizes initial chaos, the necessity of facing repressed aspects of the psyche, such as fears, traumas, and insecurities that have been ignored. In real life, this may manifest as an existential crisis, a period of confusion, or an event that completely destabilizes an individual's worldview. This is when illusions disintegrate and the old self begins to collapse. Many avoid this phase because it involves pain and struggle, but for Jung, diving into darkness was fundamental for any genuine transformation. The second stage, albedo, represents purification. After the destruction of nigredo, a phase of clarity and reconstruction emerges. Here, the individual begins to integrate new knowledge, understanding their shadows and accepting their complexity. In alchemy, this phase was symbolized by distillation and the emergence of silver, indicating an elevated state of consciousness. Jung saw this stage as the moment when the psyche finds order in chaos, allowing a clearer vision of oneself and the world. It is when the lessons of nigredo are assimilated and transformed into real growth. The third stage, rubedo, is final integration. In alchemy, this was the moment of the great work, where gold was finally produced. Psychologically, this means reaching a state of wholeness, where all aspects of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, rational and emotional, masculine and feminine, enter into harmony. This stage does not signify perfection but rather a state of psychic maturity, where the individual becomes authentic and complete. Few people reach this point, as it requires not only confronting the unconscious but also living in accordance with this newfound truth. The union of opposites and individuation. Jung saw the integration of opposites as an essential principle for psychic balance. Conscious and unconscious, reason and emotion, masculine and feminine, all these forces coexist within us, yet they often clash. Individuation occurs when a person recognizes and harmonizes these forces, instead of repressing one side and overvaluing the other. In alchemy, this process was called konjunktio, the fusion of opposites to create something new and more complete. Psychologically, this means accepting and integrating the shadow, rather than projecting it onto others. Someone who rejects their aggression may become overly passive. Someone who denies their vulnerability may act rigid and cold. The solution is not to choose one side, but to balance both. Jung saw this integration as the key to a more authentic life. It does not mean becoming perfect, but becoming whole. This process appears throughout myths and symbols in history. The yin-yang, the sacred marriage in ancient religions, and even the union of sun and moon in alchemy. True transformation does not happen by rejecting parts of oneself, but by uniting them to create something greater. Jung's ideas revolutionized the way we perceive the human mind, revealing that the unconscious is not merely a storage place for repressed memories, but rather a vast symbolic field, filled with archetypes and universal patterns. His interest in alchemy, mythology, and symbolism raises intriguing questions. To what extent was he influenced by esoteric societies? Did Freemasonry shape his views on initiation and psychic transformation, or did he simply recognize in these rituals a natural reflection of the collective unconscious? Regardless of his direct connection to Freemasonry, the fact remains. Jung decoded an essential mystery. The pursuit of self-knowledge follows a universal path, present in all traditions and eras. Humanity has always sought to understand itself through symbols, rites, and myths, and continues to do so today, whether in therapy, art, or religion. But what about you? Have you noticed recurring patterns in your life? What messages might your unconscious be trying to send you? The journey of self-discovery does not have to be an inaccessible mystery. If you want to apply Jung's concepts to your daily life, alchemy and archetypes, exploring inner transformation through Jungian psychology could be an excellent guide. Inside, you'll find simple yet profound exercises to explore your psyche and integrate the principles of individuation into your everyday experiences. If this reflection resonated with you, imagine what else might be hidden in your mind, waiting to be discovered. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue exploring the mysteries of the human psyche. The answers may be closer than you think, and the next step is yours to take.